The launch of Wuthering Waves back in 2024 was not very good. Some may even go as far as to call it bad, and in all honesty, that might not be entirely wrong. The game at launch was riddled with bugs and performance issues, freezes, massive frame drops, stuttering, and this was all coupled with the fact that the story at launch was pretty lackluster. It is no lie to say that both the story and storytelling, yes, they are two different things, have improved over the past 2 years. To compare the story of 1.0 to that of Septimont, Renacita, and La Roy would be like comparing night and day. Or is that just the perspective from behind rose-tinted glasses? Or whatever the reverse of that would be? Was the story really that bad, or is that negativity due to it being tied to a bad launch? To answer this question for myself, and since we're going back to Huanglong in version 3.5, I decided to play through all of 1.0 again. Now, before I start, there are two things to keep in mind. One, this will only be a critique of the story and narrative, not the performance. Judging the performance does not make any sense as the developers fixed the issues in Huanglong, and I also upgraded my PC from 2 years ago. Number 2, I will be critiquing the story primarily as if I'm a new player despite being a veteran. This means that while I am quite familiar with a lot of the lore and the terminology used, I will also look at this from the perspective of a new player who has zero understanding of the game itself. If you want to skip my story recap and go directly to my thoughts on the story, feel free to skip to the time on screen. To begin, I picked a new rover, chose the name Plum Onigiri 2, had to re-download the game for some reason even though I never deleted files, and since this was my first time rewatching the beginning cutscene again in 2 years, I only now noticed that the unknown woman, Lucia, gives Rover the resonance mark on her hand. As the leitmotif of Narwhal from Punishing Gray Raven plays, I fall through space and wake up on the surface of the ocean upside down, which I always thought was such a cool visual. Waking up from the dream about Lucia, I'm greeted by Yang Yang and Qixia, and the story begins. After making sure that I have all my limbs and a nose, here was the first moment where I was completely confused, and that was because of Yang Yang.
The wind has brought us a warning. The Etheric Sea is converging. It seems a new tacit field is taking shape.
I'm sorry, but what? Once again, veteran me knows what both the Etheric Sea and tacit fields are. But as a new player, what does that even mean? Thankfully, Qixia says that it's probably going to get dangerous, but neither terms, Etheric Sea and tacit fields, are explained properly. There's a brief mention about Yang Yang having a unique ability to learn all kinds of information by reading the streams in the wind. But what the hell are streams and why is that capitalized? This is going to be a recurring issue for the story. A lot of terminology is thrown about, which I get. It's a fantasy game in a fantasy setting, so fantasy words are going to be used a lot. But without a proper explanation, there's the risk of both confusing and losing the player. I go through a brief tutorial on movement, which is honestly pretty solid. I'm told how to do a mechanic like climbing walls, and I'm given an obstacle that can only be solved with the mechanic I just learned, like being unable to progress unless I climb the wall in front of me. The combat tutorial isn't bad either. We're told that there are basic attacks, a forte meter that builds up its basics, that Rover can use an enhanced resonance skill with the forte meter, which has the implication that using the resonance skill without enough forte will be a lesser variant of it, and while it does tell you that you can swap characters to use an outro/intro skill, it unfortunately does not tell you why or how the intro/outro skill works. I actually remember my first time playing during the beta and wondering how I did the outro since it wouldn't proc even though I was swapping characters. I was still very much Punishing Gray Raven coded at the time, as the outro-intro equivalent in that game has no cooldown, and whenever you swap a character, they automatically do their intro-outro equivalent. Moving on, I come across a giant stone statue of a dragon and immediately have a hallucination of it coming to life. I win the blinking contest, causing the vision to end, and I learned from Yang that the dragon is the region sentinel or guardian deity, Jue. We learned that the nation we're in, Huanglong, has 1 capital and 6 cities, with each city having its own sentinel. They also tend to take the shape of a dragon, so I guess Sin is just different, huh? Yang's expedition gets ruined by Qixia, who got into a bit of a scuffle with tacit discords. We quickly rescue her and enter the Gorges of Spirits, and enter a cutscene that shows the vast world that I'm entering. Wuthering Waves actually does this a few more times later on, like in version 2.0, and it's always great. It honestly reminds me of seeing Amarant for the first time in Final Fantasy XIV. I will say that the view was ruined a tiny bit with the fact that the game resets to the default global filter for cutscenes instead of keeping the filter that I have applied. Yang talks again about the Etheric Sea, which still has not been explained, gives us more exposition on tacit fields without explaining what they are exactly, just that they have a dormant period from when they first form. Still reeling a bit from confusion, we glide to the bottom of the cliff with an animation/pose that reminds me of Nier Automata's glide to meet up with Baiji, who has a shiny Gudra. I pretend to still be hurt, and Baiji gives me a look as if she's looking at trash, and we finally decide to head to Jinzhou, the city that we see in the distance. However, just as we decide to leave, we get jump scared by Crownless, and he is still such a cool boss. A punching bag to be sure, but a cool punching bag nonetheless. Fun fact, did you know that Crownless will not fight you unless you hit him first? Yeah, I was walking left and right for a full minute, and all he did was walk in the opposite direction that I was walking, while occasionally putting his hands up as if waiting for me to swing first. Since I already beat Hologram Crownless without taking damage a number of times already, I can confidently say that I got knocked around a few times. Like I said, he is such a cool boss fight, especially with how his cape turns into wings for Phase 2. And speaking of Phase 2, I completely forgot that he has Phase 2 music. There is an entire electric guitar riff that plays, but we never hear it again after this particular fight. Speaking of things I forgot, finishers. I mean, yeah, we have the Tomb Break animation, but that's not the same thing as finishers. Anyway, after a flawless fight of Crownless, he turned into an echo, which are echoes of tacit discords. If it helps, tacit discords are wild Pokemon, echoes are Pokemon that are captured, and our gourd-shaped terminals are Pokeballs. Unfortunately, we don't have enough badges to train Crownless, so we can't even capture him. Fortunately, we have a Game Shark and we capture him anyway, just not with the terminal. Instead, something from within our tacit mark absorbed it after we heard a voice in our head saying that it was hungry. Baiji tells us that Game Sharks and cheating is bad, but Yang counters and recites a prophecy about a cheater who may or may not be me. Then we get a long-distance call from a mysterious woman with white hair, who turns out to be Jinxi, the magistrate of Jinzhou, aka the ruler of the big city we are headed to. Jinxi talks about the upcoming moon-chasing festival, and despite the city being in a constant war with the tacit discords, the city welcomes anyone from around the world for the festival, including a certain important person who may or may not be Rover. It's not explicitly stated, but it is heavily implied. Feeling excited for the festival, we finally make our way towards the city. On the road to Jinzhou, I captured my first Pokemon in the proper manner, and completely forgot that Tomb Break was now available in the early game. I definitely had a back in my day Tomb Break didn't exist moment here. On a side note, since I was using Spectral Rover and Yang again, I honestly missed the simpler attack animations from the earlier characters. A lot of the recent characters have incredibly flashy animations that are a spectacle to look at, but that comes with the side effect of it being visual clutter, which makes it difficult to see what is going on. Some players may not mind the visual effects, but personally I wish there was an option to tone it down just a little bit to see the actual characters. A lot of the characters are martial artists to some degree, and I really enjoy seeing the snappy attack animations. Upon approaching the city, I noticed the gaze of a stalker sitting in a tree but decide to ignore it and enter Jinzhou. I stick my gourd-shaped Pokeball into the cell phone tower to download the map of the immediate area, and can you imagine how annoying someone connecting their terminal to the Nexus for the first time would be if you lived here? Especially since this is a capital city. I'm imagining this Nexus going off like once every few minutes every single day. Then again, I suppose it would eventually fade to become background noise, like hearing cars drive by your house and whatnot. After downloading the map, Yang gives me a call so that I can meet Jinxi, so I head on over to the city hall. I enter the hall, which honestly still looks amazing even after all this time, but instead of meeting the magistrate, I meet her bodyguard instead. Which I'm not complaining about. I love Sanhua. Sanhua informs me that Jinxi is out of town and won't be back for 3 days. To help stave off my boredom and my ADHD, Jinxi also gives me a puzzle to solve in the meantime that consists of 4 pieces. A black fruit, a leaf, a small device, and a sugar pearl. Since my puzzle-solving skills are in the same state of my memories, completely absent, I ask Yang to help me figure out the 4 puzzles. She takes us to the science center where Baishi is, where we meet another scientist named Mortefi. We give Mortefi the 4 puzzles in the meantime to examine, and Baishi throws me into a simulated training ground. The training is completed without much issue, but when attempting to leave, the simulation glitches out and we see a vision of another tacit discord with a scythe underneath a giant moon. The discord attacks, but the simulation ends before Rover's soul gets reaped. We tell Baishi what happened, she says that's weird, and then sends us to Mortefi, who finished analyzing the 4 items. Turns out the small device is a sundial with 2 rotating mechanisms, and only by configuring it correctly can we open the sundial. Baishi, on the other hand, tells us more about the other 3 items. The black fruit is a plain old fruit. The leaf was plucked from an area that was hit by the wave-worn phenomena, which are anomalies that occurred after the lament, and the sugar pearl is a vaccine from 20 years ago. With this information in mind, I leave to gather more information about the puzzle. But as we leave, we're shown 2 people dressed in red watching us, and Sanhua watching the 2 in red. The next day, I tell Yang and Qixia about the opening cutscene with the mysterious woman with black hair and the ocean in the sky, and the resonance cord flowing out of our Tata mark, and Yang tells us that the nearest areas to where the resonance cord was flowing are the Gorges of Spirits and the Norfall Barrens. She also believes that our dream points to the Norfall Barrens, so that's where we are headed next. On our way out of the city, we come across Jianxin, a monk who's on a little side quest of her own, but one that is ultimately not too important to us. But since our destination is the same, she tags along until we arrive at the Midnight Ranger camp in the Norfall Barrens, where she departs. At the camp, we get more information on the black fruit, which is called a mangosteen. It isn't local and is only imported from a port south of the city and has a short shelf life. Yang asks us what the mangosteen could mean since it's one of the 4 pieces of the puzzle given to us by the magistrate, and in doing so we see a vision of the front lines of the battle that Jinzhou is fighting. After a pretty cool cutscene, we actually get to play as the character in the cutscene, Jian, the general of the Midnight Rangers. After beating up the triple-headed bird alongside a few other tacit discords, Rover wakes up from the cutscene, tells Yang Yang about what we saw, and Yang Yang tells us that the streams from the Norval Barrens feel more suffocating, which makes no sense to me. But with 3 of the 4 pieces of the puzzle solved, for the most part, all that remains is the leaf. Rover recalls that Baiji scans revealed that the leaf was plucked from an area hit by the wave-worn phenomena, and that fluctuations from the leaf point to a set of coordinates. Those coordinates point to Chi-Chi Village. So we head on towards the village, clear out the tacit discords that spawn, and proceed to investigate the surroundings. We meet a non-hostile tacit discord who is crying out for his older brother, which is the first time Yang Yang ever saw one. She then proceeds to pull a Goku and puts her hand on the tacit discord to essentially read his memories, and comes to the conclusion that this village was only recently destroyed. We search a little more and find a few cards lying atop a pile of embers. Yang Yang recognizes the cards from evidence files related to the Fraxidus, a group of extremists obsessed with fusing humans and tacit discords. No one knows of their true intentions, but they do know of one of their top members named Scar, who revels in destruction. And lo and behold, Yang Yang is kidnapped through a portal, and Scar himself appears on a nearby rooftop. I'm not impressed by him performing the spring card flourish. I can do that too. Scar, despite being labeled as the cruel and twisted maniac, is actually quite calm and cordial. He sent Yang Yang away so that our conversation would be undisturbed and free of any bias that she may influence us with. And based on what he says, it is clear that he knew pre-amnesia Rover. He also isn't wrong in that out of all the onlookers who either knows or has a guess on who Rover is, he was the only one that approached us directly. Rover, being the hostile one, asks Scar what he wants with us. Scar simply says that he just wants to deepen the mutual understanding between the two of us and begins asking what we think happened to the village. He even gives us a couple of hints and tells us to figure out the rest. Now, normally this is where the player would actually follow the objectives and head to each waypoint and get the full story, including a cutscene about a shepherd and how the villagers more or less killed each other. However, I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't do that and kind of antagonize Scar, forcing him to fight us. And I won't lie, I didn't think that this would actually be an option, though it did bite me in the ass as I didn't get to watch the cutscene about the shepherd and the villagers like I was supposed to, and ended up missing out on some context. But that is 100% my mistake, as Scar even warns me that I'll be missing out on some clues if I continue to antagonize him, so yeah. Anyway, Scar pulls me into his reality marble, where I beat up some low-ranking members of the Fraxidus before fighting Scar himself. And wow, compared to the later weekly boss fights, Scar is far less aggressive. Our fight is interrupted and we wake up to a lap pillow from Yang Yang. She informs us that she shattered Scar's reality marble from the outside, injuring him, but he's still more than able to continue fighting. Which brings up the question, Yang Yang, why the hell would you give someone a lap pillow when a wanted criminal from a violent and extremist organization is right there? Anyway, one machinima-style animation later, the fight is interrupted once more by another member of the Fraxidus, a girl with gray hair and bandages over her right eye. The implication that Rover was affiliated with the Fraxidus in the past pops up once more when Scar refers to us as the girl's perfect moment. The two then depart and Yang Yang and Rover once again return to their quest to figure out the mystery behind the purple leaf. We follow its frequency to an underground cavern where we stumble across an old notebook that reveals what happened to the village. A girl had the resonance ability to manipulate the frequencies of both tacit discords and humans. The girl tried to bring back her sister who died protecting her, turning her into a tacit discord instead, and did the same thing to others, including the other villagers. The other villagers eventually found out and surrounded the girl's house, most likely taking her life. And this ends Act 3 of the Huanglong arc. And I can't continue the main story quest until my account level, or union level, reaches level 11. So I went around, beat up a red enemy at a much lower level than I should be, did some overworld quests, delivered some Sonus caskets, and finally hit UL 11. Well, I say finally, but it only took me like 20 minutes. In any case, the MSQ resumes with Yang and Rover reuniting with Chixia. We go over the 4 puzzle pieces one last time and finally open the sundial to discover a map of the city hall with a part of the wall circled in red, the entrance to Jinzhou's Grand Library. How did Rover immediately know that is the location of the Grand Library? We don't know, maybe it's a bit of text on the corner of the paper. Regardless, the Grand Library pretty much holds all the answers that one would look for, and since that would be Rover's best lead to figuring out her past, that is my next destination. Upon entering the Grand Library, turns out I can't even access the library itself until I complete a music puzzle. Now, I understand that it's a puzzle meant for the player to solve and extend playtime for gameplay reasons, but imagine working here, coming into work, and seeing that someone reset the puzzle again and now you have to lower the water level. Or maybe the workers have some sort of access key so that they don't have to do the puzzle. One water puzzle later, I finally make it to the terminal of the Grand Library. Before I can access it, Scar appears once again, having followed me knowing that I would have opened the library for him. Unfortunately for him, turns out it was an Uno reverse card from us as it was a trap laid out to capture him as Scar is ambushed by not only Sanhua, but Magistrate Jinxi herself. Sanhua uses Ice Shard to attack but also cheats by freezing him, which Ice Shard cannot do. Jinxi uses Dragon Darts but Scar brings out her freeze turn 1 and uses Detect to avoid damage. Scar loses the speed tie next turn and gets hit by all 5 hits of Dragon Darts. He decides that a 2v1 isn't that great and tries to escape using teleport, but due to the negative priority of the move, Rover is able to interrupt and enter his reality marble for the second time. After being clearly put on the back foot for a second time, Scar decides to Mega Evolve and become a goat. Sadly, the Mega form allows me to perform a critical hit, which would have looked a lot cooler if the camera angle didn't bug out and end up with me attacking nothing. Scar is successfully defeated and is put in chains, but since he's a pretty good sport about losing, he decides to answer what questions we have after asking how we set him up. We're shown a flashback of Rover meeting up with Jinxi, the time and location given to us from the sundial puzzle piece. During the flashback with Jinxi, we receive a mega lore dump from her. A few key points from our conversation. 1. The Sentinel Jue was captured by the Fraxidus, and that was the reason why she was gone for 3 days. 2. The Fraxidus' goal in Huanglong is to resurrect the Ternodian, which is more or less the opposite of a Sentinel, and to cause another lament. Number 3, Jinxi can resonate with Jue, which means she can see the Sentinel's memories, and it all aligns with who Rover is, which makes it very possible that Rover is the person in the prophecy, the one who will confront the Ternodian and save Jinzhou. Even so, Jinxi does not plan on relying on a prophecy to save the city and plans to take matters into her own hands, giving us the choice whether or not we want to help her. With the flashback over, we decide to ask Scar questions of our own. He tells us that since Jue essentially has clairvoyance rank EX, the Fraxidus wants to remove it from the picture so that they can make their own future instead of following one that is simply preordained. The Ternodians will bring about the true lament, and the Fraxidus will have a new world built upon the ashes of the current one. And lastly, he whispers a secret into Jinxi's ear that rattles her. With no other questions left to ask, Scar is taken away and put in jail. We ask Jinxi what Scar told her, but she tells us that it is too sensitive to know and wants to fact check it before telling us. However, she does tell us that since Jue has clairvoyance, long ago it told Jinxi to pass on a message to us.
To the awakened one, when raindrops fall upstream, please head to the Northfall Barrens and seek General Jian.
But since the rain has yet to fall up, Jinzhou gives us a lead on figuring out our identity, and that is to seek out the members of the Black Shores. Members of the Black Shores usually wear a Blake bloom somewhere on their person. This triggers another memory from Rover where she sees herself wearing a Blake bloom. With this new lead, we leave the Grand Library to meet up with Yangyang and Qixue once more. We inform them of what happened in the library and that we need to meet Jian later. Upon hearing the name Jian, Yangyang becomes Miss Expedition again and tells us his backstory through a neat little cutscene. Years ago, Jinzhou was still at war with the Thenodian named Overthrax. Overthrax had the ability to turn frequencies of soldiers' weapons into tacit discords. This war was not going well until the previous general of the Midnight Rangers, Geshu Lin, rose up and pushed back the tacit discords with his black flames. However, the tide turns once again when the retroact rain began to fall. So, Geshu Lin made a final stand against Overthrax, but his loss crippled the morale of the Midnight Rangers. At the last moment, Jian managed to step in and take charge of the army to organize a retreat. After the battle, Sentinel Jue instated Jian as the new general of the Midnight Rangers and Jinzhou as the new magistrate, which leads us into today. With that cutscene over, Yangyang also mentions an old woman who owns a flower shop who might be able to help us learn more about the Blake bloom flower. So we go to the old lady. The old lady tells us she's never seen a Blake bloom before in her life, but she sends us to go find her assistant whose resonance ability is related to flowers. So we travel a little more and find the flower girl in a field of flowers. She introduces herself as Verena, and she's never seen a Blake bloom before in her life and isn't even sure that it's a real flower. Qixue idly wonders if wearing a Blake bloom automatically makes her a member of the Black Shores, which gives Yangyang the idea of wearing a fake Blake bloom in order to lure out any members of the Black Shores that might be in Jinzhou. So, Verena uses her ability to create an imitation of the flower, which absolutely mesmerizes Qixue as if she can't shoot fire bullets out of her fingertips. While that's going on, Yangyang gets the feeling of being watched, so I send her and Qixue back to the city with the fake Blake blooms while I investigate the stalker. Pretty dumb if you ask me, why ambush your stalker alone when you could do it as a group? But what do I know? Anyway, I made my way to the top of the mountain to prepare for the stalker, who turns out to be the white-haired girl who was sitting in the tree near the start of the game when we arrived at Jinzhou for the first time. Stalker girl gets pinned to the ground by Rover and interrogated at Blade Point. She admits that she's a member of the Black Shores and that the Blake bloom is their symbol, representing their mission to save the world. She also says that she's been protecting Rover from the shadows, which is why we haven't encountered any Fractidus members aside from the two overseers until now. Our meeting with Jinzhou, where we made the plan to capture Scar, was going to be interrupted, but thanks to the Stalker Girl, they were not able to interrupt. Stalker Girl then calls us a very special seed, and that she'll be keeping an eye on us before attacking us with tentacles as a distraction to vanish, but not before telling us that her name is Camellia. Since I'm devoted to Cantarella, even if Rover doesn't know it yet, I decide to not chase after the girl who is a walking red flag and practically screams you can't fix her. At that very moment, Yangyang calls and says that Qixue apprehended a suspicious individual, so I head on over to see what's happening. The person that Qixue apprehended turns out to be a white-haired guy with shades named Alto, who keeps trying to talk to the elderly and minors. He's even looking for a little girl. Qixue decides that she's heard enough and decides to take him to the police station, or patroller station, but Alto is saved at the last moment when a little girl with pink hair named Encore comes up and says she knows him. However, that still does not mean he is not suspicious, so he runs away, and Yangyang, Qixue, and I give chase. We get Uno reverse card, as Wuthering Wave's Sampo and Encore running away was just to get me alone. Sampo tells us that he was almost fooled by the fake Blake bloom flowers that Yangyang and Qixue were wearing, And although I have questions for him, Alto tells us that he's an information broker and that the answers that we seek come at a price. His price comes in the form of assisting him and Encore with a task in a location called the Whining Isis Mire, so why fly on over there? Yes, I know that the game unlocked the Resonance Beacon to teleport there, but flying is a lot more fun than a loading screen. Upon arriving at the mire, just outside a giant facility known as the Court of Savantae, Alto gives us a One Piece reference before explaining what the task is. Turns out, the resonance beacons that let players teleport around the map aren't just there as a gameplay mechanic. They're actually detectors that help predict when the next lament is happening. However, when the Court of Savantae researchers all mysteriously vanished, the beacons near the court were damaged to a degree. And since having a blind spot in detecting a country-sized calamity is a pretty huge deal, Alto and Encore were sent by the Black Shores to investigate what happened and retrieve any lost beacons. So we enter the ruins of the Court of Savantae, and Alto notices the droplets of water hanging in the air and realizes that the researchers were trying to recreate the retroact rain. So what exactly is the retroact rain? Simply put, it's a phenomenon when the condensed remnant energy forms into water and falls up instead of down like regular rain. And because remnant energy records various events across time and space, those that touch the rain will see phantoms and hallucinations of figures and events from the past. Why were the researchers trying to recreate the rain? Fraxidus. And because they were studying an ancient civilization that they called divine beings, they wanted to recreate a divine miracle with the artificial retroact rain. They don't really go into detail as to what these divine beings or this divine miracle is. Anyway, we go around to restore power to the facility and we come across a phantom of an old man lamenting his past mistakes and a hologram of the mysterious woman from the very first cutscene of the game appears once more momentarily. When Rover mentions that we think we know the mysterious woman, Alto has one of his suspicions confirmed, though we don't know what he was thinking about. We don't even get the chance to ask, as since the power is now restored, we can take the elevator down to the lower floors where the lost resonance beacon signal is coming from. Once we arrive in the lower levels, we're greeted by a giant mechanical abomination which is also the source of the beacon signal. The fat ass ate it. The mech didn't like being called a fat ass and turns hostile, which is understandable, so we beat it up. From what Alto gathered, after failing to create the artificial retroact rain, the researchers of the facility moved to making a replica of the ancient civilization instead in lieu of the mech, and were subsequently devoured by said mech. But now that we fulfilled our end of the deal and recovered the lost beacon, Alto is open to questions from us and we learned 3 major things. 1. The Black Shores is on humanity's side and uses the resonance beacons to warn other civilizations of early signs of a lament, which leads into point number 2. Alto and Encore are in Jinzhou due to early signs of the Thenardian awakening. This coincides with what Chin-Si said earlier about how she was given warning by members of the Black Shores. Number 3, and quite possibly the biggest lore reveal, Rover's awakening at the beginning of the game was not the first time we woke up. The previous time Rover woke up, it was at the Black Shores. Alto then gives us an actual Blake Bloom which can act as a key to the Black Shores should we want to visit in the future. And although we have more questions to ask, before we can ask them, Alto checks the recovered resonance beacon, freaks out from what he sees, and then runs outside. We follow him outside and discover that the true retroact rain has begun to fall, signaling the awakening of the Thenardian. To make things worse, we get a call from Yang telling us that Jinzhou is under attack from a Tacet Discord outbreak. Being the hero that we are, we help push back the Tacet Discord outbreak off-screen. Why off-screen? Because during this time, we get a perspective change to Jiyan, the general of the Midnight Rangers. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but aside from adding some backstory to him, nothing of note really happens aside from him getting word that Rover is headed towards the outpost and he goes to meet us halfway. We do get some more lore about him and Kenshu Lin, and a nice little cutscene of Frolova directing the tacit discourse towards Jiyan's outpost, where her leitmotif plays in the background. Anyway, back with Rover, we have a short lull in the fight, where we reunite with Yang and Qixia. We also meet Tao Qi, who is both the director of the Ministry of Development and the one in charge of Jinzhou's defensive fortifications. This is also the one and only time that players will get a chance to talk with Yuanwu, a playable character, but at the moment he is just a named NPC off to the side. Not even an optional objective to talk to him or anything, so if you don't talk to him here, you'll never get to talk to him again. He does give you a few items that will boost your damage, so if you do miss him, you really don't miss anything. Back with Tao Qi, we get some more exposition about the Retrospective Rain. While under normal circumstances, it can only summon phantoms that repeat history in a loop, when powered by the Drenodian, as it is now, they act more like tacit discords and attack humans. And since Jinzhou has been at war with tacit discords for a long time, the land is ripe with phantoms to use against its city and its defenders. The lordom is interrupted as another wave of tacit discords are on the way. We get a nice little Avengers Assemble cutscene, but it honestly just falls flat since we barely know half of the characters on screen. Ling Yang I haven't even met in this playthrough. Yuanwu I talked to for all of like 10 seconds. Tao Qi I literally met just now and all she did was give me a lore dump. And Verena just made us a flower before delivering Encore to us when we met Alto for the first time. Imagine how much more impact this scene would have had if the characters on screen were characters that we actually spent time with and grew to know. The short bit of combat right after is pretty cool since we get to see the other characters fight alongside us, which is something that is rarely seen even 2 years later. After wiping out the wave of tacit discords, we get a call from Qinxi. She reminds us of Jue's prophecy of how once the rain begins to fall up, we are to meet General Jiyan in the Norfall Barrens to fight the Drenodian Overthrax. And so we head out to meet Jiyan, get interrupted by a big-ass tacit discord called Thundering Mephis, which is a conglomeration of countless fallen soldiers' reverberations, and beat it up with the help of Jiyan, who comes in the nick of time to save us. He also has a prophecy to tell us, one that he received from Jue when he was promoted to general.
Beneath the full moon, guide the returning one to confront Drenodian. From the threat itself, he shall reclaim the power to conquer it.
So now that we have a prophecy to fight the big bad enemy, we make our way towards the forward operating base, but on the way there, a giant statue arises from the sea and creates a barrier around itself. Jiyan mentions that this is the exact same thing that happened 3 years ago, signaling that Overthrax is eager to strike. At the forward operating base, we consult with Jiyan on a plan of attack. There is the issue of the barrier and the lack of means to get past it, to which Mortefi, yeah, remember that guy? Comes in and says that the Disruptor, aka the BFG, is prepared and ready to shoot. But as cliché demands, the primary power supply is damaged, so we have to use the backup generators. So we go down to the BFG, clear out the tacit discords while Jiyan and the other NPCs work on repairing the generators, and then watch as the BFG fires and takes down the barrier, allowing the ground forces to advance. On our way to Overthrax, Jianxin, the monk from earlier, and Yang, who were originally part of our strike team, stay behind in order to hold back the Tacit Discords, allowing Rover and Jian to finally reach Overthrax. If it seems like I'm rushing through this part, it's because from the disruptor firing and until now, it was just move, fight, move, fight, move, fight. There is honestly not much to talk about there. Upon entering the Overthrax statue's heart, we see Crownless once more, teach him another lesson, which, by the way, Plenilune in his title means full moon, so he's literally the moon sacrifice. The full moon being Overthrax, if that wasn't clear. And this is made even more evident as once Crownless is defeated, he melts away and Overthrax's moon-shaped heart spits out another Tacit Discord, one that looks similar to Crownless but with a feminine form. This new Tacit Discord, which I'm just going to call Dreamless for simplicity's sake, attacks us, so we fight back. It even does the cinematic attack where we can hit the Energy Blast back at it, which we only see again by fighting Hologram Dreamless in 3.0. Dreamless shoots a Hyper Beam, Jian moves in front of me and uses Endure to take it. I use Hyper Beam's cooldown time to run at Dreamless. Dreamless uses Protect, but it doesn't realize that Rover has the ability Unseen Fist. Rover also has the hidden ability Color Change that turns me into a Havoc type from Spectro, and despite my attacks not being very effective, Dreamless is pushed back since it is a 2v1 with Jian's help. Being the sore loser that she is, Dreamless decides to use Explosion, but remember that voice from way back in the beginning of the game, after the first Crownless fight? The one that's inside our hand and ate the echo of Crownless? Yeah, turns out it's a little mascot looking thing that eats the explosion from Dreamless. It then turns around, sees Rover, becomes really happy, hugs Rover, and then falls asleep. And then before any more questions can be asked, it goes back into Rover's tacit mark. Jian mentions that Dreamless chose to flee, having used the explosion as a smokescreen. And with Overthrax's presence now gone, the statue begins to fall apart, so we leave. After one final cutscene summarizing the aftermath, mainly of how Rover and Jian returned as heroes and a bit of foreshadowing for version 1.1, the story comes to an end. So now that the story is over, is it really as bad as I remember? Well, actually no, not really. The narrative is actually pretty cohesive and has a steady throughline. Rover wakes up with amnesia, meets Yang, Qixi, and Baizhi, beats up Crownless, a mysterious entity within Rover's hand, Abby, eats the echo of Crownless. We see a hologram about Jinzhou talking about an esteemed guest and enter the city proper. We do a little side quest before actually meeting Jinzhou and receiving a prophecy of meeting Jian once the Retrospective reign begins. Help out Encore and Alto in the meantime since they may have information on Rover's past. And once the Retrospective reign begins, we defend Jinzhou from the Tacit Discord outbreak, meet Jian, make an assault on Overthrax, and win with the help of Abby, who appears once more to eat. It's a standard hero's journey following a prophecy to save the world, and there is nothing wrong with that. However, my issues with the 1.0 story come in a few key points. The first is that not only did the story try to do too much with too little time, it also tried to involve too many characters at once. In terms of story lengths, going by my OBS recordings, version 1.0 was roughly 5 hours of playtime, while version 3.0, the first part of Lai Hai Roi, was only 3 hours. So why does version 1 feel so rushed compared to version 3 despite being longer by almost 2 hours? Well, I'd say that this is due to the fact that starting in version 2 and the Renacita arc, there's one major overarching antagonist for the entire story arc alongside minor antagonists for every patch. The story for version 1 does not have that. For example, Renacita's major enemy was Threnodian Leviathan, but there was also Frolova for version 2.0 and then Fleur-de-Lis in version 2.2. And while we did defeat Leviathan's Resonator in Fleur-de-Lis, its influence was so vast that we had to go to Septimon and finally take it down at the end of version 2.7. That's an entire 8 patches, technically 5 if we're excluding the filler patches, to pace out the narratives before the final confrontation. Lahai Roy's major enemy is Aleph 1, but there was also the Void Worm in version 3.0. Aleph 1 made a major appearance in version 3.1 where Amos sacrificed herself, which left the vast majority of the player base seeking vengeance against Aleph 1. We then get that vengeance in version 3.3 where we control a Gundam and beat up the Cosmic Bastard. In both of these examples, we only meet a few characters per patch and only hang out with 1 or 2 for the majority of its story. By doing this, players get the opportunity to learn about each individual character in depth while also being introduced to new characters over the course of 3 or 4 patches, with each patch having roughly 3 to 4 hours of main story content for roughly 12 or so hours of getting to know all the characters. Now, if we look at version 1.0, the primary antagonist for the jinzhou arc is Overthrax, with a minor antagonist in Scar. We take down both of them in the same patch, and in that one patch of roughly 5 hours of game time, we're introduced to Yang, Qixia, Baishi, Qinxi, Sanhua, Mortefi, Jianxin, Scar, Frolova, even though we don't know her name yet, Verena, Camellia, Alto, Encore, Jiyan, and Taoqi. I'm not including Yuan Wu nor Ling Yang since we don't formally meet them in any capacity. That is 15 characters within 5 hours, and for most of them, we spend less than half an hour with. That is nowhere near enough time to get to know the characters, much less form a connection with them. If version 1.0 story was released today, and if we follow the formula that Kuro's been doing, Scar would be the primary antagonist of 1.0, while Overthrax is still the major villain for all of version 1. Meeting Alto and exploring the Corda Savantae's ruins could be the version 1.1 patch. The Black Shores could be version 1.2, which ends with the arrival of the Retrospective Rain, and then version 1.3 could be fighting Overthrax. Mount Firmament and Shinsi could be version 1.3 segue MSQ. This way, the story will be better paced and more fleshed out, giving players more time to learn about the world, the characters, and probably wanting to save Jinzhou regardless of whether or not there was a prophecy. But I do understand why the devs didn't do this. One, I'm looking at all of this in hindsight from 2 years in the future after Kuro finally found their footing. And 2, going by the rumors of how the original story of Wuthering Ways was supposed to go and how it got scrapped very late into development, the writers probably had to scrounge up whatever they could to create a semblance of a story. The second key point is that there is almost no connection between the player and the world. Almost right off the bat, the players are told that they are the fated hero to save Jinzhou and defeat Overthrax. But aside from obligation, what reason is there for the player to care about being a hero? When playing through the story of 1.0, both upon launch 2 years ago and now for this video, I felt no connection to Jinzhou nor its people. And as much as I wanted to care about Yang and Qixia, it was difficult for me to do so. Qixia was gone from the party for roughly half the story, and Yang was there primarily to deliver exposition to the player. Due to this, despite the fact that Yang was with Rover for the vast majority of version 1.0 story, she never felt like her own person. She felt more like a human encyclopedia that sometimes spouted vague words. This becomes very prevalent during the finale with the Avengers cutscene. I already mentioned it earlier, but imagine how much more impactful that scene would have been had we met the characters earlier on. I understand that the devs and writers only had a single path to work with, so they could only focus on a few characters, but that does not change the fact that the scene just falls flat. Imagine if Yuan Wu came along to the court of savantae ruins along with Encore, Rover, and Alto. It wouldn't be too far-fetched, as Jinzhou had Sanhua keeping tabs on us for a long time. So what if Sanhua reported to Jinzhou about Alto's task about going to the ruins, and Jinzhou asked Yuan Wu to tag along as extra security? And since he's a citizen of Huanglong, I feel as though he would know a little bit more about the ruins. As for Taoqi and Lingyang, yeah, I'm not too sure where they could have appeared in the story as part of the main narrative. Maybe Taoqi could have met us at Qiqi village since she's in charge of the Ministry of Development and the city's defense. Maybe it's just me, but I do think that the residents of a neighboring village mysteriously vanishing would have raised a few flags, so she could have gone out to investigate. This is the reason why version 2.2 and version 3.1 hit so hard for a lot of the player base. At the end of 2.0, we meet Cardithea and spend most of version 2.2 traveling with her and Cantarella. We learn who Cardithea is as a person and we grow to care for her. And then when she overclocks trying to, and failing to achieve her second awakening, she still saves Rover and gives the rest of her power to Rover before passing away. I watched through a lot of streamers' VODs and a lot of them teared up when she was finally laid to rest by the tree, and some of them even cried. Then in version 3.1, we meet Amith and learn who she is to Rover. We see their shared history and grow to care for her as a person, so when she sacrifices herself to turn back fate and hold Alaf at bay for a little longer, it resonates with the player. In both of those examples, the player had hours dedicated to a single character with the narrative focusing on them as well. So when Rover acts and ends up as a hero, it's not due to some preordained prophecy or because someone told them to be a hero. Rover ends up as a hero as a side effect of pursuing their own selfish desires. Now compare this to when Yang Yang was kidnapped by Scar. I won't lie, my thoughts upon seeing that was just, oh, okay, both upon launch and now. This isn't because I dislike Yang Yang or because I'm some edgy, unfeeling person with a heart of stone. No, I didn't have a reason to care about her to such a degree. If it was someone that I spent time with and cared about, such as Cardithea or Amith, then my reaction would have been a lot different. In this regard, having a connection to the characters in jinzhou would have in turn made me want to save the city because the characters live there. That would have a bigger impact on the player and story rather than a mere because it was prophesized. Instead of being told that I'm a hero due to a prophecy, let me be a hero by happenstance. Let me save a city because I want to save it since I care about it and not just because I'm a good person. Let my actions define who I am, not some prophecy from some guardian deity or the like. And finally, the third issue I already mentioned near the beginning of the video, but is the amount of information that is front-loaded to the player. To repeat what I said, within the first 30 minutes or so of beginning the game, we are given so many fantasy-sounding terminology that it is difficult to keep track of it all. The first is Yang Yang's line about how the wind brought her a warning, the etheric sea is converging, and that a new tacit field is taking shape. Then once you gain control of Rover, Xixie says that we have a tacit mark on our hand that makes us a resonator, and that Yang Yang's resonance ability lets her read winds to gather information. A bit later, we get attacked by things called tacit discords, come across a statue of Jue and learn that it is one of the sentinels in Huanglong, And once we leave the gorge, there's mention of the etheric sea and tacet fields again. The timer on the recording for this part was at 22 minutes and 40 seconds. And this is including the 5 or so minutes spent downloading resources. Remove those 5 minutes, plus a couple of more minutes that I spent taking notes, that is roughly 15 minutes that I was playing the game. And within those 15 minutes, I saw the terms etheric sea, tacet field, tacet mark, resonator, resonance ability, tacet discord, Jue, and sentinel. Do you want to know how many of these were explained? And I don't even mean in extenuating detail, I just mean with at least a single line of text. Jue and sentinel. The rest, the player needs to learn through either assumptions or context clues, like how resonator means person with powers, resonance ability is the power, a tacet mark is the weird tattoo on a person's body, such as Rover's hand, Shishia's waist, and Yang Yang's forehead. A tacet discord is a monster, and tacet field is where tacet discord spawn. However, none of these are even explained, and the game just assumes that the player would either know what they are or figure it out on their own. Some players might actually be able to figure it all out on their own, and that's great. I'm happy they can do that. I'm one of them. But you have to look at it from the other perspective. There are some people who might struggle and be left confused as to what's going on, whether because they learn things in a different manner than those that can figure it out on their own, or maybe they don't play that many video games, so they can't make those connections in their head from past experience with games. I'm not saying that the game needs to explain every single thing like explaining things to a child. However, there is a middle ground between two extremes of not explaining anything and letting the player figure it all out on their own, and babying the player and telling them everything. And just because there's the optional tutorial that players can navigate to through the menu does not make it much better. There's a fantastic video by Josh Strife Hayes about the quit moment, and that is very relevant here. If players feel the need to learn basic information about the game and world by going to a different menu that some might not even find, that is a quit moment, and some players might just stop playing the game right then and there. If players start to feel overwhelmed with what's going on and are just left confused without much explanation, that is also a quit moment. Granted, we do learn more about the aforementioned terms as the game goes on, but once again, some players might have just stopped playing by then. And one more minor point, the fact that everyone is so trusting and accepting of Rover right off the bat just always felt a bit off. Yang Yang and Qixia are both members of Jinzhou security to some extent. Sure, Qixia is a self-proclaimed hero, I think, but Yang Yang is literally a member of the Midnight Rangers, Jinzhou's military force. A bit of skepticism would not have been out of place even if Rover did fit the mold of the prophesized hero. As it is now, with how accepting everyone is of Rover, it's almost naive. Now, I know what some of you may be saying. The original story pre-release was different. The original closed beta test story had the characters not liking Rover and being distrustful, and Qixia even pulled a gun on Rover, which caused a major backlash from the community, so Kuro had to change the story last minute. I get that, I do. That's pretty much what happened with Destiny 1 when it Holy crap, 2014, almost 12 years ago. Back when it released in 2014. But I can't judge a narrative on a what if or a what was. I can only judge what we got upon the full release. I can't judge something that I've never experienced. Okay, so post-editing me here. I'm adding this in after my double check to make sure everything looks and sounded good before exporting. I realize that I'm sounding quite critical and negative in the summary section, which makes it sound as though I'm hating on the game. That isn't the case. I will admit that I am being critical of the narrative, but being critical does not mean hate. In fact, I would argue the opposite. I'm critiquing the game because I enjoy it so much that I would want it to improve upon what I personally felt were the lower quality parts of the game. Once again, I want to reiterate that I do not hate nor dislike the game. I like the game and will most likely continue to do so until its end of service, and quite possibly still like the game after EOS for all of the great memories and experiences I've had from it. So with all of that being said, I rate the story for version 1.0 a solid.
The etheric sea is converging. It seems a new tacit field is taking shape.
Out of 10. Thank you for watching, and may you journey well in the boundless sea of stars.